Hello and welcome to the Emily Rassam Show. I'm your host, Emily, and today I am joined by Luke Mickelson, and I'm going to give you a brief introduction about him. You built a bunk bed in your garage in Idaho in 2012, and tonight we're talking about how one bed became $350,000. But before we get to the numbers, please tell us about the little girl who changed everything.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, Emily. Yeah, I think things happen in people's lives and you don't know how big they are at the moment, but they sure feel big. Look, I tell everybody, I'm a farm kid from Idaho. I'm from a small town. And the beauty of living in a small town is also the curse. You know everybody and they know you very intimately. But looking back, the beauty of that is I learned the joy of supporting the community and the community supporting you, and what camaraderie feels like and friendships tighten and you just rely on everybody and that played a big role in 2012 when all of this started because I've always enjoyed serving people and I always enjoyed being a part of a service project because I think true joy really comes from service and so when in 2012 when all this kind of madness started I was a regular guy. I had a good job. I'd been there for at that time 10 years and a father of three and a husband. I was a football coach. I worked in my church or served in my church and I just loved it, right? I loved where I was in life until there's a moment I think in everybody's lives where you just start wondering what really matters. I was a father now, and my measurement of success wasn't how many zeros behind my paycheck anymore. I didn't care so much about that. I realized life was more important. Other things are more important than the money you make or the toys that you have in the garage. And when you start changing or even questioning what is your level of success, what does success or fulfillment look like to you? Because success doesn't always mean fulfillment. And I was going through this I was right in the middle of this. I was doubting my faith. I had a faith crisis. I had an identity kind of crisis where I wasn't sure who I was and what I was supposed to do. And anyways, this lasted for a little while, and it's not a fun place to be in. When you have all these questions, and you don't get the answers you want or any answers. Period. It can be pretty depressing, and I'm not that kind of guy. So I fought this. I fought it internally for quite a while. No one knew, and I'm glad it happened because in the middle of this kind of turmoil, I was, like I mentioned, I served in my church working with the youth, and I was what you'd call a youth pastor. It was called a young men's president, but I was basically over the boys' activities, which was Boy Scouts. I was kind of the leader of the Boy Scouts, and each week we had activities, which was difficult to, even nowadays, probably more so. It's difficult to find an activity for these young men that doesn't involve a screen or a computer or a phone or a game or something. And so I was always kind of on the lookout for this. Well, in this position, I attended several meetings a month with other auxiliary leaders in the church, and we'd talk about what's going on in the community. We'd talk about events, the things our individual stewardships were involved in, and then people that we were helping within the church and with outside of the church. Well, one of the leaders stood up and talked about a family that she had visited. And this family, why it kind of struck my ear, because they lived in a part of town I didn't even know existed. And you got to understand, this is a 3,500, 3,000 populated town. I'd been riding my bike around it since I'm 5. You think you'd know every inch of it. And I didn't know that this apartment complex even existed. That's how kind of remote it was. And she talked about how the mom and dad, they struggled. She was the local school bus driver, and the dad, suffered from some mental health issues, so he couldn't hold down a job. And, they needed help with food and rides to work, and the kids didn't have any beds, and they needed some coats and toys. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. Did you just say the kids don't have any beds? Like, they got mattresses, right? And she says, no, they're just sleeping on the floor with blankets and a pillow. And Emily, that just hit me. It was just one of those things where, number one, keep in mind, I'm going through kind of this emotional, what am I, what's important in life. And then you learn that there's kids down the road in your own small town sleeping on the floor. I was almost mad about it, to be honest with you. But then I thought, okay, here is a great opportunity to get an Xbox controller out of these Boy Scouts' hands and put a drill in it. And we're going to teach them something, right? So I got pretty excited. I went home and my daughter had a bunk bed. So I took some measurements off it and came up with this, kind of a simple design. I'd never built furniture before in my life, but, I'm a farm kid. I know my way around a tool, I think. And so, I wasn't afraid to do it. I'd never done it before, but I wanted to make it simple because we're talking about Boy Scouts, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids. But I also wanted to make it sturdy, so,
Right.
When I designed it, I had that in mind. Well, I went the next day, I went and got the wood and all the, the necessary tools. And the boys came over Wednesday night, Thursday, and Friday. And we built this bunk bed. And it was super fun. You're out there figuring it out together. I had a chance to talk to the boys and, educate them on what would it be like to sleep on the floor. Think about that, and how now you're helping kids that are to get their own bed. How does that make you feel? And so it's really good teaching opportunity and coaching opportunity, which was right down my alley. And then we finished this bed, and everybody had so much fun. In fact, the word kind of got out in our own little congregation and community that we had built this bed for this family and we were going to deliver it. Well, Saturday morning came around to go deliver this bed, and man, we had like 30 people show up. Like, guys, we can't send, an army over to this little 2-bedroom apartment. So me and a bunch of people, we stayed back. And this is the first week of December in Idaho, not a tropical place, by the way. It's
Right.
cold out. So the boys and some of the leaders went to deliver this bed. Well, the next day at church, they just talked about how amazing the experience was, and it was exactly what I was hoping. They saw the conditions, right? They felt how that would be, at least saw how that would be to sleep in those conditions, and then to see the joy on the kids' faces when they brought in the bed. It was just a great win-win for everybody. And I was super excited as the leader of the boys. To be honest with you, I was a little jealous. I didn't get to go on the delivery, but that's okay. We had solved the problem and everything was good. Well, the next week come around, and it's funny, Emily, how life just kind of creeps back in, doesn't it? You just kind of fall back in the same rut. And for me, it was almost worse now because here I just did this amazing project and I got this little spark of passion that I'd been searching for. Just enough to fill my heart up, and it was amazing. And then it was over. It was fulfilled. And I'm sitting on the couch wishing I could find something that could do that again to me. And that's what I wanted. That's what I was missing. Well, me and my kids were watching our program, Big Bang Theory. Who doesn't love that, right? And a commercial comes on. And it was, I don't even remember the commercial, Xbox game or something with the Xbox. Well, every parent that's got a kid in the first week of December knows what's going to happen next, right? Sure enough, the kids, Dad, can we get another Xbox? And Emily, it just hit me, right? Here I am, sitting on the couch, struggling with who I am. Am I a good dad? What's more important in life? What can I teach my kids? Here they've got a bed. I just delivered a bed to a child that didn't have one. They want another Xbox. These kids don't have beds. They need to learn. I mean, just this tornado of thoughts just going through my head, and all of a sudden I just had this small little thought, right? I call it my little tiny moment, where it said, here's a chance to teach your kids something. I almost felt it more than I heard it, and so the next thing I know, I just stood up and I started walking to the garage door, and my kid said, Dad, where are you going? And I said, I've got some leftover wood. We're going to build another bunk bed and you're going to come and help me. And we had a great time. My daughter out there in her pink tutu, hammering away, and my son in his Boise State jersey, drilling screws and wood. We just had a great time because I wanted them to feel the joys of service. I wanted them to know that, listen, when you have problems in life, it's hard to get around them. It's hard to shrink these monsters, these challenges that we have. But service, when you do service and you think about someone other than yourselves, right? It puts you in a state of mind where you can you just look at your problems in a much different perspective. And all of a sudden they seem smaller. They don't seem as heavy, and so I wanted them to learn that. Plus I wanted them to appreciate the things they had, like a bed. The ironic thing was is we finished it, but I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know that child bedlessness was a problem. We had solved it, right? The only kid I knew that didn't have a bed, we solved it. And so I didn't know what to do with it. And my wife said, well, why don't you put it on one of those buy-sell trade groups on Facebook, right? And Keep in mind, this is 14 years ago, and I had no idea what that meant. I was like, you want me to put a free bed on Facebook? Okay, this will be interesting. But what happened was pretty shocking to me. Two things happened. The first thing was so many people commented on it. Like, just commented on this post. People I never met before, didn't know who they were. They were from towns over, or friends that I hadn't talked to in like 20 years, right? Just people commenting. And the second thing is what they commented about. They all knew kids that were sleeping on the floor. And they shared with me the conditions, cement floors and pallets and couches and 3 or 4 kids to a bed. It was just really shocking to me that the conditions and the numbers that we were dealing with in my little small community. And I got excited because I had this bed, right? Well, I got a phone call the same night, and it was from a friend of mine. And she said, hey, Luke, have you delivered that bed yet? I said, no, why? And she says, let me tell you about Haley. And you mentioned the little girl.
Right.
Haley is a 6-year-old girl, or was rather, a 6-year-old girl that had never slept on a bed before. Never. She slept in the backseat of her mom's car. They were homeless. And my friend worked in the social services, and she was helping them finally get a home. And so I thought to myself, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want. This bed that me and my kids built, right? This is what I wanted to go solve, this problem. And so we loaded up the bed and we hauled over to Haley's house. Now, I'd seen poverty before, helped transitioning homelessness. I've been in these types of homes before. But I never walked in the front door and seen this through the eyes of a 6-year-old, right? And that's what I did. I walked in, and when you do that, and you look around and there's nothing in the house, right? You realize there's no couch or TV to watch cartoons in the morning, like we did. There's no table or chair to eat Cheerios, in the morning like we did. The only thing in the house was a can of soup that was sitting on a hot plate. That was it. And little Haley, although she didn't know why we were there, she was so excited. She was excited she had a house. She was excited that she had a bedroom, and she wanted us to show us her bedroom. I said, sure, show us where you sleep. And we walked back in her room, and Emily, I mean, you could imagine what this room looked like. It was holes in the carpet and tears in the wallpaper. The closet door was missing, dimly lit. It's just one of those scenes. But of all of those things, the most shocking thing I saw was when you looked in the corner of a room, there was a pile of clothes, and that's where Haley slept. It was a nest. She'd come home from school, and she'd put her PJs on, and then sleep on her school clothes, shirt for a pillow and pants for a blanket. That's all she knew. And the next day she'd wake up and put on those same shirt and pants and go to school. And that just floored me. I wasn't ready for that. I'd never seen it before. The Boy Scouts told me what it was like, but until you're in the room and you see it for yourself and you feel just the weight of the situation, I was excited to bring Haley her first bed. And as we started bringing in the pieces of the bed, I watched her. I wanted to see what her reaction would be like. And when she finally realized what we were putting together, which was her first bed, she just erupted. It was like Christmas morning. I mean, she came over and hugged me and hugged my buddy. These two strange dudes making all sorts of racket in her room. And then she did something, Emily, I'd never seen before and never forget. She went over to this bunk bed, wrapped her arms around it, hugged it, and then she gave it a kiss like it was a sibling, like it was a mother. It just, hey, I like to think I'm a strong farm kid from Idaho, and I about lost it. It was just so shocking. So I was so unprepared. And if that wasn't enough just to, lay me out, I look up and here's mom, single mom. And I was raised by a single mom too. So when I watched those tears just pour down her face, I knew what each one of those tears meant, right? I knew the pain and the frustration and the guilt and the worry that a single mother has for a child, and how unfortunate it was. As hard as she tried, a bed just was too much of a luxury for the family. And I just thought, that's so terrible. Like we me and my kids spent a couple of hours, each night for a couple of nights that week to solve that problem. Yeah, that's well worth my time, And right then I knew this is way more than just a bed. This is way more than just a good night's sleep, And I tell everybody, listen, if you just give me 60 seconds, I want you to think, what would it be like growing up without a bed? These kids, little Haley, for example, when she wakes up in the morning, she didn't sleep well. She's probably sore. There's a saying called you wake up on the wrong side of the bed for a reason. You're grumpy, you didn't sleep well, you're not ready, certainly not ready to go to school and learn like the other kids. So your grades suffer, your attitude suffers, right? You make poor friends, and what friends you do make, you can't have sleepovers, you don't have a bed. So what do? You end up going to your friend's house, and not only does, little Jessica have a bed, she's got throw pillows. She's got all sorts of stuff in her room that, these kids, can you imagine what the psychological toll of those kids is, what that does to them? And worse yet, Emily, when you and I have a bad day, the boss was rough, lost a client, argued with our spouse or friend, whatever the deal is, or worse yet, you got the flu. You tell me, what is the one place in the entire planet that you'd rather be? It's your bed. And these kids don't have one. That's what we're dealing with. And that's what I realized when I saw little Haley's excitement, when I saw that mother. Listen, I'm a farm kid from Idaho. I love hunting. I love fishing. I love sports and college football on Saturdays. And I kid you not, for 35 years I loved them. But in a snap of a finger, none of that mattered to me anymore. I knew that there was a problem. I saw it. I had a post that had similar kids in the similar situation, and I thought, you know what? There's no better use of my time than building beds for kids. And I looked over to my buddy on the way home and I said, you know what, Jordan, no kid's going to sleep on the floor in my town if I have anything to do with it. I was that angry. I was that, determined. And so we just started building beds.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And while I'm at it, did you come up with the name Sleep in Heavenly Peace because it was Christmas time?
You asked the right questions. The answer is no. Well, the answer is yes, but that was not the first name. My wife at the time says, well, because we started building beds and delivering them. We actually built and delivered 21 beds that Christmas before Santa showed up. It was awesome. It was a great 3 weeks, So my wife said, well, you got to call this something, It was just our family little Christmas project, and I'm like, I don't know. Well, actually, I said, well, I've been thinking about this, and I got the best name, Beds for Babes. And trust me, everybody, when I finally said it out loud, yeah, it didn't ring very well either. My wife looked at me and she says, no, that's not the name. And I said, well, what do you call it then? And she says, how about Sleep in Heavenly Peace? It's Christmas time, Silent Night, that hymn, that psalm, that Christmas song talks about a certain child that didn't have a bed. I mean, it just fit perfectly. And it tells the kids exactly what we want them to do. It's just to sleep in heavenly peace, like we all want to. And so thus, Sleep in Heavenly Peace was born.
I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's part of why I podcast, is because I felt like it was a calling. Do you feel like this was a calling, like they describe at church? Sometimes you get that little voice that you were saying.
Yeah, at the time you don't, right?
Right.
I knew I was searching for something. I was searching for meaning. I had a faith crisis, so I was searching for that too, And this is what I speak on. I call it my Tiny Moments tour because, Emily, we all make changes in life. We all want to do good. We all want to be better. We all want to improve and be remembered. We all aspire to transform into something better, which is great. We need that. We need that desire. But it's the second step in transformation that's the key. And it's the hardest step. And it's the step that's far less practiced. And that's acting on your tiny moments. We read self-help books. We dream and plan and scheme all these goals that we have of how we want to change. But if you don't have a desire to act, which is the hardest part, and you don't need to feel bad knowing that that's the hardest part, because it is, right? But the reason why it's so hard is because when we do have tiny moments, and they hit us all the time, you think about something or you feel something, you see something and you feel something about it, and you feel like I could do something, even a little bit. These are tiny moments that we often, far too often, dismiss. I'm too busy. I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. Someone else is taking care of it. All these excuses, as valid or invalid as they are, it robs us of what I think is the most important part of transforming ourselves into who we want to be. And that's acting, that's practicing on acting on these tiny moments. Because if you don't act on them, right? And I'm blessed, I'm lucky that I was in a state of life that the desire to act just finally was stronger than my desire just to dream about it, Because when you finally act one time, you're going to find something that you become passionate about. And that passion grows. And passion is what turns into purpose. And there's nothing worse on the planet than not having a purpose, And so why not take the time to act? Listen, you might not change the world every time, right? But I promise you one thing. You're going to change someone's world. And that someone might just be you. And that's okay, right? That's okay. This is how we learn. This is how we find what we're really passionate about, is acting on these tiny moments, these thoughts, and then learn the practice. And what's going to happen is you learn how fulfilling that becomes. And that fulfillment creates a characteristic in you to be able to look at problems, look at situations that are otherwise haunting you, and be able to look at them in a different perspective. Emily, I tell on my podcast all the time, I said, it's us leaders and especially people that aspire to really change the world. But I think it's in everybody. We have this weird, terrible ability. It's a superpower that we all wish we didn't have, is when we have a problem that we don't want to face and we lock in the closet, that problem just gets bigger. That monster just grows 10 eyes and fangs, as big as we can imagine. And it isn't until we face it that we can actually start shrinking that monster, right? And I get it. Some monsters are just they seem too big at times to open the door and face. But service is the one act that can change your character enough to be able to look at that monster in a completely different perspective. And when you do that, most of the time, that perspective allows you to go, that monster's not as big and ugly as it seems, And then you find a way around it.
That really is true. And I don't know about you, but from a business owner's perspective, when you don't deal with the monster right away, it does become really big, really fast.
They do grow.
And very expensive.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about leadership now, which is a topic I'm very passionate about and I love to talk about, what is a leader in your own personal definition? We don't have to go with Webster's.
Well, good, because I don't know Webster's. A leader's a lot of things. I think a leader is an example setter. I think a leader is someone that serves. I think a leader is someone that has humility, in times that require it. I think a leader is both selfish and selfless at the right times. But ultimately, I think a leader is someone that has passion and loves to share and show that passion. It's kind of funny. I listen. I'm not a marketer guy. I'm not a creative guy. But when it came to sleep in heavenly peace, I had thoughts and visions and dreams and marketing campaigns and things that I would otherwise never come up with. And it's because of the passion I have for it. And that's where I think the rubber really meets the road when a leader wants to lead, I guess, or when someone finds true passion. That's what people gravitate to, and they gravitate to the excitement and the confidence, also the humility, the acts of service, the example that they set. That's true leadership.
And speaking of leadership, I was perusing your website on leadership, and something struck me. I wanted to ask you about scaling your business or your nonprofit. How did you go from your garage to a totally novel idea, really, in your space with 400 chapters?
Yeah.
400 plus chapters,
Correct.
May I add?
You're right. When this started out, this was just a family Christmas project. In fact, I was a little hesitant being a charity just because, not that I have a bad taste for charities at all. You just hear the horror stories and things of how charities get ran. And I didn't know any, intimately. I knew I donated to some, but I didn't know how they functioned. I didn't know how they worked. I just knew I'm an entrepreneur, so I just know business and I know how to set up and sell and thrive a business. So that's all I did. When we decided to be a nonprofit, I just ran it like a business. And in business, right, you have to prepare for scalability. You have to set scalable goals and scalable procedures and processes. Emily, when I started to build a bunch of beds and shared it with, on Facebook and with the community, a couple of things happened. Two things really. The more I built and shared, the more people came and told me about kids that they knew. I learned more and more and more. It's like every bed I built, I learned about 10 more kids, right? And how big this problem really was, called child bedlessness. And the second thing happened is I realized there are millions of people, at least in my community, there was thousands of people that want to help. They want to serve. They just don't know how. And when they find an activity that is meaningful, fulfilling, fun, not necessarily easy, it's just a great volunteer experience, they jump on it. Not only do they jump on it, they bring their family and their friends and they tell everybody about it, right? And really that is the key to scalability, at least in the nonprofit space. I knew that early on. And I also knew that if we were going to solve child bedlessness, it isn't going to be by some farm kid from Idaho. It's going to be by people in the local towns, just like me. I'm just a local community member that found a problem and solved it. Anybody can do that in their community. And so I thought, let's build a scalable, easy, low barrier to entry type of organization, where almost like a franchise, if you will, where people can do what we did. We'll teach them how to do it. In fact, better yet, we'll take all the minutia of administration and reporting and all that business side of things. We'll take that away from them. They don't have to worry about that. They just have to raise money, build and deliver beds, which is the easiest thing to do on the planet. By doing that, we had people that of all walks of life, young, old, retired, full-time employee or not, all walks of life. If they have a desire to help the kids in their community, they can, and they can start chapters. And so now we put on about, 50, 60 chapters a year. And we've grown from the one that started to now we've trained over 470 chapter presidents.
And where is the greatest concentration of chapters, or is it kind of spread out all over the United States?
It's a great question. It's really by density. We had what we call a first chapter president, or first generation rather, chapter president. And basically what that is, early on, no one knew about Sleep in Heavenly Peace. And the way they found out was either they saw me on a TV production or an interview or a podcast, right? They've never heard of it, but they just heard about it from a publication, and they want to start a chapter, which was great. That first year that we had our first national, let's call it national publication, we went from 7 chapters to 125. We just blew up. Right. Now, most of our chapters are what we call second generation chapter presidents, which is they've been to builds, they've been on deliveries, they've known SHP for many years. They just finally are in a season of their life where they can start a chapter, or they went and 3 or 4 states over, or they went and met a friend and went to a build, and then they went back home and realized there's not a chapter there and they wanted to start one. So we just organically grew. The beauty and the reason why we could do that is because we put scalable processes and procedures in place. People can easily find us, they can easily get trained, they can easily get a chapter set up, and then we provide constant and ongoing support so they feel and can be successful.
Thank you for sharing that. And can you tell us your website, just in case someone does not look in the description after they listen to our video?
You bet. It's easy. SHP, Sleep in Heavenly Peace, SHP Beds, plural. So shpbeds.org. Now, when you go to that, it's we changed this up a few years ago. It used to just go to some big national website, right? Like a lot of like a lot of nonprofits. But our structure is based locally. We want local community members to step up and solve the problem in their town, because I can't solve it for them. In fact, the back of our shirts, you can see on the back of my shirt right here, right? The back of our shirts say our mission statement: no kid sleeps on the floor in our town. Well, that mission statement's not meant, like many mission statements, for the company to tell the public what we're doing. It's actually reversed. We want our mission statement, we want the public to tell us what they're going to do, which is no kid in our town. Right? And so we feel strongly about that. So when you go to our website, it's going to geographically sync you to the closest chapter's webpage. And what you're going to see there is how many kids they've served. You're going to see how many kids are on their waiting list. You're going to see the events that they have coming up that you can participate in. You can donate. 90+% of your donation stays right in that chapter. All the beds stay right in that chapter. And if there's not a chapter close to you, and this is something that really, resonates and pulls at your heartstrings, you can start a chapter, right? We have a very robust and successful training program for chapters. And best yet, probably the most important, is if you know of a child that's sleeping on the floor, someone that's in trouble, whether it's your own child, your neighbors, or a friend 5 states over, you can go to that website, shpbeds.org, and select apply for a bed. And you can apply for as a referral or for your own child. And based on the zip code that you put in, if a chapter president has accepted that zip code as a deliverable area, they'll get that application. Now, the sad reality is most chapters have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of applications on their waiting list. Right now, as you and I speak, we have, on average anyways, we have about 150,000 kids on our waiting list all the time. And we deliver almost 100,000 beds a year, right? So we're actually coming up on our 500,000th bed built and almost 400,000 beds delivered. It's an awesome milestone.
Wow.
But the sad reality, that 150,000 kids right now as we speak that'll sleep on the floor tonight, we only cover 30 of the United States. So it doesn't take rocket science, to calculate just how many kids are actually on the floor. Child bedlessness represents greater than 3% of the total population, which equates to well over 12 million kids in our very rich and successful country don't have beds. That's a pretty sad reality. And that's how unknown and how shocking and horrible that child bedlessness really is.
Do you think that sometimes we have stigmatized things so much that we kind of try to hide them? And what would you say to someone who is in this situation as a parent from your perspective? What kind of encouragement would you offer them?
It's a great question. In fact, I'll tell you a story. We have what's called Bunks Across America. It's our national build day, which is actually turned into a national week build, where we encourage all our chapters to build on the same day. It's not necessarily the number of beds that we built that's important. It's really to raise awareness and to allow everybody in the country to feel united in the cause of building beds, the mission of building beds. This year, it's the second week of September. We anticipate and have a goal of having over 15,000 volunteers build 10,000 beds in a single day. We're pretty excited about it, and I think we're going to reach that goal. But years ago, the very first Bunks Across America that we had, I had a guy come up to me right in the middle of the build. We're all building beds, and I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off, trying to teach people how to build beds and all this. And I get a tap on the shoulder. And this guy comes up and he says, "Hey, Luke, can I talk to you for a minute?" I said, "Sure." And he's like, "I have to apologize to you." And I'm like, "I don't even know who you are." You don't have to apologize to me. He says, "No." He says, "I've been following Sleep in Emily Peace for several years, and I never applied for a bed for my child. I was too embarrassed." And I about cried, because I get it. As a father, especially, well, I shouldn't say especially, a mother is just as important, or has the same feelings, as a parent, rather. That's hard to admit to yourself that beds are a luxury. And food, clothing, shelter. I mean, those are the 3 big ones you gotta solve first, right? And if that takes all the money and all the time, then yeah, you're left without. And it's humbling, right? And he apologized. He says, "I finally applied and you guys delivered a bed to me last month. So I could not miss today. I had to show up and build beds. So I felt, justified." And it was a beautiful story, and it's so true, So I encourage Listen, I encourage everybody. I grew up in a small town with a single mom, 5 kids. I remember going out to the mailbox to grab the mail one Christmas holiday season to get the mail, and in the mailbox was an envelope, blank envelope full of $1,500 in cash that my community gave my family because we weren't going to have anything. And I tell you what, that's the essence of what community is about, or helping each other. We're just humans helping humans, and unfortunately these are little humans that are in this situation never because of their problem or their fault, right? Never something that they caused. And worse yet, Emily, they can't solve it. A lot of problems that we solve for other people, there's an argument that we enable them or they can solve it themselves. They just don't have. And that's probably true in some cases. But a bed for a child, they can't solve that. And so someone has to. Or the kid's going to sleep on the floor the rest of his life, right? Or at least until he grows up. So someone's got to step up. And so as a community member, if you don't have a bed for your child, just know that there are people there that with no judgment and with actual great excitement will deliver a bed to you and to your child. And I'll tell you what, they love it because they get more out of it almost than they think the kid does, because it brings such a level of fulfillment. I am so grateful that I was able to deliver a bed to Haley, because had I not, I wouldn't be talking to you today. We wouldn't have 500,000 beds for kids built. So that mother who applied, or that mother that allowed us to come do that, just think what she's done for all these other kids, right? And if you're a community member and you take the time to go find out how bad child bedlessness is in your community right now you have a responsibility to help. And it can be fun and enjoyable, and it's amazing when you walk into the room, little Johnny who's hiding behind mom, and you're bringing him a bed, his very, very first bed, and he finally realizes what it is. He comes out from behind mom, and that apprehension turns to appreciation, and then it turns to excitement, and then he grabs drills to help put the bed together, and he grabs the pillows and the slats, and he makes his bed, and then he goes to bed at 3:30 in the afternoon in his very own bed because he's never had one. It's the most incredible feeling, Emily, and it's one that I can tell you, I can show you pictures, you can see videos all day long, but like I said, until you're in the room and you feel that emotion, you feel that moment, it's just indescribable.
That's really beautiful. I really appreciate you sharing those stories, and I do have a question for you. I have two kind of more questions before we wrap up for the day, but one of them is, do you have any advice for someone who might be listening that has their own nonprofit from like a PR standpoint, which when we think of PR, it's advertising we don't have to pay for, that you would recommend to them?
Absolutely. And listen, I have my own little business called Humans Helping Humans, where I help consult nonprofits how to scale and what that looks like, and these questions exactly. And that there's a lot to that question, right?
Right.
I think the most important thing I tell nonprofits is, first of all, listen, you're running a business. You're not running a nonprofit. I mean, you are, right? But you need to look at it as running a business, right? And what that means is you have overhead, you have rainy day funds, you have margins, you have things. You can't have 100% come in and 100% go out, right? So you run a business. The second thing is, and this is a gold nugget. So because I learned it the hard way, but it's been so valuable. I've learned a lot of things the hard way, Emily. I don't know why. I'm just one of those kids.
It's just how it goes.
Just how it goes. Your volunteer experience needs to be just as important as the mission you serve. And the reason why is because volunteers are far more than just hands to help. They're mouths, they're mouthpieces, right? They're recruiters, they're salesmen, they're donors. They help broadcast, help people feel the mission. And when you have a good, and even better yet, an excellent volunteer experience, you're bound to grow. I learned a long time ago, a guy named Hank came into a build, my very first public build, in the middle of winter. I didn't expect anybody to show up because it was too cold. But in walked Hank, This guy's like 700 years old. I mean, he was an old dude, right? But he had that grandpa smile. You just instantly loved him. And he came up to me and he says, "Where do you need me?" And, my first thought was like, I don't need you to die. Like, that's number one, right? But no, I said, no, what'd you do for a living? And he says, I was a carpenter for 40 years. I said, okay, I know exactly where to put you, right? If there's one part of our build process is don't cut the wood wrong, right? You can't stretch wood out. And so I showed him the saw and the good bad thing about the saw station is you touch every piece of wood, right? Because you have to cut it. So it's not a physically easy job. And this always worried me, because I was dead set. I did all the hard stuff. I wanted volunteers to enjoy their times. I didn't think that, hey, let me get that for you. This is too heavy. You guys just do that, Well, the build was done and I forgot about Hank. It'd been like 3-4 hours. And I said, oh my gosh, I forgot about Hank because you're so busy running around, right? And I ran back to this cut station. I said, Hank, how you doing? And he looked at me, took his hat off. His face was just covered. I mean, just as white as his hair, right? From sawdust. And he wiped off the sawdust. And he's like, Luke, let me tell you something. And I was like, oh crap, here it comes. He's like, I've spent my life in service. He says, and I've donated my time at a lot of events. He says, I've never shown up to an event, and in 5 minutes, I was put on an assignment so critical and so demanding that I couldn't leave. I couldn't even go to the bathroom. And I remember thinking, I was like, Hank, I'm so sorry. And he held up his hand, Emily, like to stop me, He held up his hand. He's like, no, thank you. And it just dawned on me, right? When you want to volunteer your time, you want to really feel like it meant something, right? You want to feel like you did good. You want to feel like it wouldn't have gotten done had I not shown up. And that's what we provide our volunteers. These beds don't make themselves. These cuts don't happen. These drills, these passing wood back and forth. It's interesting. You have a station waiting for a station while someone's waiting for you. It's just this assembly line of goodness. You touch every piece of wood. Every fingerprint that you have goes on every bed that goes by. Those are the volunteer experiences that people remember and they feel attached to. Now they're part of the mission, right? And they go and share it. And they go and volunteer again, and they donate, and they bring their friends, and they're their mouthpieces. These are how you scale an organization, and it's how you broadcast your mission the most effective way.
That really is a great tip. And thank you. I love how you always share a story along with each lesson you're teaching.
I got plenty of them, Emily.
No, it's great. I think it's a really great technique, and I appreciate that. And, even in the Bible, Jesus told a lot of stories, too.
Parable King, yep.
Now we remember all of those, right? That's the only way we remember them all in detail.
That's right. Some of my parables don't make any sense. They make sense to me, but,
And so, since I've asked about it from other perspectives, how do you feel having your kids grow up watching this nonprofit grow and experiencing the lives that your family has been able to touch and to have other families touch other people's lives? How did that impact them growing up? And do you recommend this for all the other dads?
Well, I'll be honest with you. Number one, I did this because I wanted my kids to learn, right? And they did. I've had a lot of great father moments where my son came home from school and said, Dad, I saw a lady, a little grandma, pulling on her lawnmower to get started. He says, I went and mowed her lawn, and I'm going to do it every week. And oh man, talk about a dad moment, talk about exactly what I was hoping. And now my kids, although they're busy in their young lives, they don't get a volunteer, obviously near as much as they used to. But they're tied to it. I love when they say, oh yeah, this is my charity too, because we did it as a family. They get to have an ownership to that, which quite frankly makes them stay a little bit on the straight and narrow.
Right.
But it's beautiful. Would I recommend it? Of course I would. But you dads out there, and I'm speaking from very personal experiences, you still have to live your life. You still have other obligations. You have a passion. And this is what I didn't realize, maybe a little bit too late. Too late. Man, that sounds harsh. Sorry, I don't mean that to sound so deep. But it can become consuming, and you end up looking back, and I missed a lot. I wasn't there a lot. I was traveling a lot. I was doing that, and I think a lot of businessmen will say the same thing about looking back. I don't know, Emily. It's kind of a trade-off. I always wondered if I didn't put that much into it, would it grow to where it is right now? Is it worth it for the sacrifice of losing a few years in touch with my kids and my family? I won't make that decision. I won't make that correlation. I'm just grateful that I have this organization that has built me up, that has saved me, and has been successful, right? And I'm equally grateful, probably more grateful actually, that I have a very good relationship with my kids, and they can look back and at least maybe appreciate that their dad meant well, did well, and maybe at times didn't serve them as much as he served the other kids, that he was serving. But he meant well, I don't know. So do it, but don't make it your priority, I guess. I've never told anybody that one, Emily. So
Well, thank you for sharing it with me. I always ask that because I'm a parent of little kids and I need all the advice I can get, especially the good advice. And so I like to finish up by asking 3 quick questions. They're not going to be so tough
fire away.
as that one. One is, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received from someone? And it can be throughout your life. It doesn't have to be related to business.
Sure. Man, I've got it on my business on my mind, but
Well, you can answer either one.
I'll give you that one. Some of the best advice, actually, is something I heard very recently that saved me, or at least would have saved me a lot sooner due to suffering from something called founder syndrome. But is, listen, when you start your organization, especially a nonprofit, because they're started out of a trauma or something that happened to you or to a friend that's very personal, very personal. You got to remember, you can love it and you will love it, but it won't love you. It won't love you near the same, because it's a company. And so when you finally reach that point where your company doesn't need you the same way, and this, what happens is your identities together fuse. You become one. It's your baby. People only know your organization because of you, and now people only know you because of your organization. It starts taking its own entity. It's kind of like sending your kid off to college. They don't need you anymore, at least not in the same capacity. That can be difficult, right? And had I not understood that, or had I understood that earlier, I wouldn't have made some mistakes and dealt with situations as poorly as I did. But hey, we made it through it. So that's probably the best advice on business, especially starting a nonprofit, I'd give you. The best advice I think I've been given, but I'm sorry to say it's the hardest thing to do on the planet that I strive for every day, and that's just try to be honest with yourself. If you're honest with yourself, which requires vulnerability, it certainly requires humility, you'll never be stronger, because you'll never get hurt. Emily, no one can hurt you if you already know your problems, if you already know your weaknesses and strengths, right? And not only that, you can turn them into strengths. You can actually now see the monster that you've been fighting and lying to yourself about for so many years. You can face that and now deal with it. So learning to be honest with yourself, which involves being vulnerable, which involves you don't know everything. Ask advice, lean on people, learn from other people. Know that you're smart, but there's smarter people in other areas than you. I don't know. All these things culminate in understanding that if you can learn to be honest with yourself, you'll have a much more successful and beautiful life.
Amen to that one. Okay, my other question is, what is your favorite book?
Okay, you struck a real hard chord there, Emily, because I am not a reader.
No,
I've read.
that's okay.
So I grew up very religious. My books were the scriptures. Honestly, I always felt if I was going to waste time reading, because that's what I felt it was, I'd read my scriptures. But now, I mean, I on my podcast, I have a lot of coaches that I interview that have written books, and I'm starting to read a lot of their books, which are business related, which I enjoy. My wife's really trying to get me into just fictional, fun, relaxing books. I read Dracula, which was a really cool book. I've read some of the Harry Potters, if that doesn't date me. It's a great question, but I think honestly, the books that shaped me the most was the scriptures. It just, gave me a foundation, or at least a compass. Wherever you believe on that spectrum doesn't matter. I'm just telling you, it gave me a compass to guide me through some really tough decisions and tough characteristics that I needed to deal with in my younger years.
Right? And I always read the scripture and I'm like, wow, at least I'm not that bad. So
Sometimes.
a lot of those stories, that's what I think as soon as I start reading them. And one final question. Is there anyone that you would recommend to be on the Emily Rassam Show now that we have spoken?
There's a lot of people. I know a lot of amazing organizations. Obviously depending on what you're looking for, inspirational stories. I was a CNN hero, so I got 10 of them right there that are just amazing people. I've got people obviously within my own organization. I mean, we're talking people that have dedicated their entire retirement to building and delivering beds to kids. One comes to mind, a gentleman named Joe Genovese. He's our chapter president. This is a cool story. Chapter president in Arizona, who, when he was retired, he started working for Habitat for Humanity for 27 years, by the way. And then when he was done with that, he said, you know what? He wanted to restore one of those old beetles, like the right. So he restored a beetle, and in not just Phoenix, everywhere, but Phoenix in particular, there's all these beetle clubs, right? People that have Volkswagens and they go on little rides together. Well, he came up with the brilliant idea of contacting all of these Volkswagen bug groups, and on one day in Christmas time, they would get letters from families that kids that needed toys, and they would deliver these toys in a big caravan of beetle bugs and buses. I've been a part of it once. It's the coolest thing. There's 200 of these buses with all filled with toys, all going to hundreds of kids. Well, one year they got an application, 2 kids, I believe it was. They didn't ask for a single toy. They only asked for a bed because they didn't have one. And much like my reaction and others, Joe just couldn't believe it. He was just shocked. So he went and got a couple of beds for these kids and delivered them. Part of this, I think they call it the bumper beetle bus tour or something like that. Well, the next day he gets a call from a friend of his and said, hey, you delivered a bed to a child, right? Something along the lines that there's more. Have you ever heard of Sleep in Heavenly Peace? And he says, no. And he's like, well, they're a charity that builds beds for kids. And we have a lot more bed applications. Why don't you contact them? They have a build coming. I live in Idaho. I was driving down to Gilbert, Arizona to do a build with my brother. She says, why don't you go to this build and figure it out, and see what he's doing? He says, great, when is it? She said, tomorrow morning. So he shows up, and that's when I first met Joe, this old guy walking around with this camera, figuring out what we're doing. And I finally went up to him and I'm like, can I help you? And he told me the story. And he says, I just want to provide beds for kids. I said, tell you what, why don't I teach you how to be a chapter for your own chapter here in Phoenix? Well, long story short, and this is like 9 years later, Phoenix is our largest chapter. They've built almost 14,000 beds for kids.
Wow.
Just incredible. They build every week. They have an amazing team, all from one guy's interest in helping one family. So he would be a great one to interview.
I would love to speak with him.
Okay, I'll make that happen.
Well, thank you, Luke, so much for joining me on the show. It has been a true pleasure, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavors, and we will be following you to stay updated.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me.